On Christmas morning of 2024, the small Montana town of Frost Hollow awoke to a silence that felt deeper than usual. Snow lay thick across the rooftops, muffling the world in white, as smoke rose lazily from chimneys and colored lights blinked softly in the pre-dawn stillness. It was a morning meant for warmth, family, and the familiar rustle of wrapping paper. But at exactly 6:27 a.m., that calm was shattered when a terrified 16-year-old girl called 911 from a small, single-story home on Birchwood Lane. Her name was Lily Carter, and her voice trembled as she told the dispatcher that her father had been murdered. When officers arrived minutes later, they found the front door unlocked, a window in the living room forced open, and inside, the body of 44-year-old Daniel Carter lying dead in his bed with 3 gunshot wounds to the chest. Daniel's bedroom was still, the faint scent of pine from the Christmas tree drifting down the hallway, blending with the metallic tang of blood. The bed sheets were soaked through, and the nightstand had been overturned, as though a struggle had taken place in the final moments of his life. His hunting rifle, a .308 Remington, was missing from the gun safe, and snow in the backyard showed a single set of footprints leading away from the back porch toward the fence. Beyond that point, the trail vanished into the drifts. To the responding officers, it looked like a burglary gone wrong. To Detective Michael Graves, who arrived not long after sunrise, it felt different. Something about the scene was too deliberate, too careful, as if someone had studied what a home invasion should look like rather than experienced one. Inside the living room, Lily sat wrapped in a shock blanket, her blonde hair tangled, her eyes glassy and distant. She told officers she had been asleep in her room when she was jolted awake by 3 loud bangs. She said she froze, terrified, and hid in her closet until she was certain the intruder had gone. When she finally came out, she found her father dead and immediately called 911. Her story was calm, consistent, and delivered with the shaky rhythm of someone still in disbelief. The window appeared to back her account. The missing wallet and watch gave weight to the burglary theory, and the sound of her breaking voice as she described finding her father felt painfully real. Daniel Carter was well known in Frost Hollow. He had been a biology teacher at the local high school for nearly 15 years, respected by students and adored by colleagues. After losing his wife, Lauren, to cancer 5 years earlier, Daniel had devoted his life to raising his only daughter. He was known as the kind of parent who showed up for every game, every recital, every parent-teacher conference. He was the teacher who stayed after hours to help struggling students, the man who volunteered for weekend science fairs, the neighbor who shoveled snow for elderly residents without being asked. His death on Christmas morning, in the safety of his own home, was unthinkable. As the morning unfolded, the house became a crime scene, surrounded by police tape and flashing lights. Neighbors gathered in their driveways, stunned, whispering in disbelief. Frost Hollow was a town that prided itself on safety, a place where people left their doors unlocked and waved to every passing car. A murder here felt like something from television, not real life. But as Detective Graves examined the window, he noticed the pry marks were too even, too symmetrical. The glass had fractured inward, but left almost no debris on the carpet. And most curious of all, there were no footprints beneath the window outside, only a clean blanket of untouched snow. He didn't say anything yet. He had been in homicide long enough to know that first impressions could be deceptive, but he also trusted instinct, and something in his gut told him this was no ordinary break-in. He watched Lily from the corner of his eye as she sat silently on the couch. Her hands trembled as she held the blanket tight around her shoulders. Her tears came and went in waves, but her breathing was steady. Her answers to questions were measured, too measured, Graves thought. Trauma was rarely that controlled. Later that morning, as forensics processed the scene, they found the rifle buried in the snow behind the fence. It had been wiped clean, no fingerprints visible on the stock or trigger. 3 shell casings were recovered from the bedroom floor. Ballistics would later confirm all were fired from Daniel's rifle. The coroner's early report estimated the time of death between 4 and 5:30 in the morning, based on body temperature and coagulation. That meant the shots were fired at least an hour before Lily's 911 call. The timeline didn't fit her story. By the afternoon of December 25th, the quiet charm of Frost Hollow was gone. News vans lined Birchwood Lane, reporters whispering under scarves as snow kept falling, soft and unrelenting. Yellow police tape fluttered like a warning ribbon around the Carter home. Inside, technicians moved carefully through the hallways, their camera flashes briefly illuminating fragments of a life that had ended too suddenly. Detective Michael Graves stood near the kitchen window, watching condensation form on the glass. The smell of pine needles mixed with gunpowder and old coffee. He noted the smallest things, the untouched cookies on a plate labeled "For Santa," the string of lights still blinking above a half-wrapped gift. Everything in the house told him that Christmas had started normally. Only the silence screamed that it had ended in tragedy. The team cataloged evidence methodically. There were no signs of forced entry except for that suspicious window. No muddy footprints, no glove marks, no foreign DNA. The back door locks were intact. The security camera above the porch had been unplugged 2 nights earlier, according to the neighbor's footage. That detail made Graves' stomach tighten. Either Daniel Carter had forgotten to reconnect it, or someone had wanted it disabled. Outside, the temperature dropped further. Reporters tried shouting questions, but officers kept them behind a barricade. The town had never seen a homicide in 5 years. Most residents still left cars unlocked, still trusted their neighbors. That sense of safety was dissolving hour by hour. Graves met briefly with the medical examiner before the body was moved. 3 shots, close range, upper chest. No defensive wounds on Daniel's hands, which suggested he'd been asleep when the first bullet hit. The angle of entry placed the shooter beside the bed, standing over him. Whoever fired the gun had known exactly where he slept. By evening, the autopsy confirmed what Graves already suspected. The time of death was around 3 in the morning. That narrowed the window, literally and figuratively. Lily's call had come nearly 3.5 hours later. Graves replayed that delay in his mind like a skipped record. She said she'd hidden in fear. It made sense emotionally, but the math refused to sit quietly. On December 26th, Frost Hollow awoke under gray skies. The Carter house remained sealed, but the case had already become the only topic in diners and barbershops. The town wanted answers. Graves wanted truth. He reviewed phone logs, searching for any outgoing calls or texts from Lily during those missing hours. Nothing. Her phone had been switched to silent. At headquarters, analysts processed the rifle. Fingerprints, Daniel's, and one partial smudge that could belong to anyone in the house. Gunshot residue testing was ordered for Lily immediately. Standard procedure, but it carried a quiet weight. She didn't resist, just held out her hands, pale and trembling. The test came back negative. That didn't clear her, but it kept suspicion on a leash. Days passed. The funeral came quickly, held at St. Augustine's Church downtown. The turnout was overwhelming. Students, colleagues, and townsfolk filled every pew. Graves stood at the back, watching the girl in the front row, her black coat too big, her expression locked somewhere between sorrow and shock. She didn't cry, not once. He noted that detail and hated himself for doing it. Trauma affects everyone differently, he reminded himself. But the thought lingered. After the funeral, reporters started to dig. They found that Daniel's life insurance policy had been renewed only 2 months before his death, naming Lily as the sole beneficiary. It wasn't unusual, most parents did the same, but the timing became fuel for speculation. Online forums buzzed with theories, some cruel, some absurd. The Frost Hollow Police Department was forced to issue a statement urging the public not to interfere. Then a break. Small, but enough to shift momentum. The ballistic analysis showed faint traces of cleaning solvent on the rifle barrel, newer than the last time Daniel had gone hunting. That meant someone had wiped it recently, possibly to remove prints. The rifle had been stored in a locked cabinet in the basement. No sign of forced entry there either. Graves returned to the house, moving through the basement with a flashlight. The cabinet key hung on a hook beside the shelf, right where Daniel usually kept it. The person who used that gun didn't need to search for it. They knew where everything was. January 3rd brought the first real crack. Forensics returned results from under Daniel's fingernails, minute traces of skin cells not belonging to him. Too degraded for a full profile, but consistent with someone living in the home. Graves stared at the report quietly. It wasn't proof, not yet. But in his experience, coincidences rarely multiplied without reason. He revisited Lily's interview tape, playing it on his office computer late into the night. Her voice was soft, shaky, but certain in places where uncertainty should have existed. When describing the gunshots, she said 3. No one had told her the exact number. That detail haunted him. The next morning, he arranged a second interview. This time it felt different. Lily's answers came slower. She seemed tired, detached. When asked why she waited hours to call 911, she said she thought the intruder was still inside. But officers had found no signs of anyone hiding. Her story had holes, but none large enough to fall through completely. Meanwhile, lab technicians pulled partial footprints from the carpet fibers near the bed. Light impressions consistent with thick socks, not shoes. That indicated the killer had been inside the shooting, barefoot or in house socks. The evidence map began to rearrange itself. Community sentiment shifted. Some residents defended Lily fiercely, seeing her as a victim twice over, first of loss, then of suspicion. Others whispered darker theories. Graves knew public pressure could ruin an investigation, so he moved quietly, sharing little. He ordered a deeper dive into Daniel's finances, his digital history, his relationships. The picture that emerged was one of quiet struggle. Medical bills from Lauren's illness had left debts that Daniel had only recently paid off. His last few paychecks showed extra tutoring hours and weekend work at a local lab. There was no sign of gambling, addiction, or criminal involvement. But there was one curious discovery, a hidden folder on his computer labeled simply "Private." Inside were scanned letters and email drafts addressed to someone named Marianne. The tone was intimate, almost romantic. Cross-checking email metadata revealed Marianne Lowe, an art teacher at the same high school. They'd kept their relationship discreet, likely to avoid gossip. Marianne confirmed they had been seeing each other for a year and were planning to move in together in the spring. She was devastated. But she also revealed something else. Daniel had been worried about Lily's behavior recently. He told her the girl had become distant, secretive, occasionally angry when he mentioned Marianne's name. That note slid into Graves' mind like a puzzle piece finally fitting. He revisited Lily's school records. Grades had dropped, attendance spotty.
Teachers described her as intelligent, but withdrawn. After her mother's death, she'd clung to her father. The thought of sharing him with someone new might have triggered resentment. Graves didn't need to prove motive yet, but one was forming. January 10th. Snow had turned to ice, coating Frost Hollow in brittle silence. Graves met with the district attorney to review progress. Without direct evidence, a confession, a fingerprint, a clear forensic match, they couldn't make an arrest. He knew the rules. Still, he felt the momentum shifting beneath his feet. That night, unable to sleep, he drove past Birchwood Lane. The Carter house sat dark and hollow, a shadow of its former warmth. He imagined the events of that night, the sudden violence, the cold calculation it might have taken. He wondered if grief could truly twist into something lethal. By mid-January, new results came from the digital forensics team. They had recovered deleted search history from Lily's laptop. Among the entries were phrases like, "How to clean a rifle barrel," "How long does gunpowder stay on skin," and "Staged burglary tips," each dated less than 2 weeks before the murder. Graves read the report twice.
The first days of February brought a rare thaw to Frost Hollow, melting snow into slush and turning driveways into mirrors of dirty ice. But for Detective Graves, the cold was internal now. The evidence was stacking like layers of frost, each one thin on its own, but together forming a wall of quiet certainty. The deleted searches were the first undeniable shift. No more coincidence, no more blind sympathy. What he had now was intent, written in digital ink. Still, he needed proof that would hold in court, not just in his gut. Forensic recovery continued on every piece of the Carter household. Technicians vacuumed fibers, analyzed traces of cleaning agents, cross-matched soil particles from the backyard fence where the rifle was found. Late one afternoon, the report came back showing detergent residue on the rifle stock, a household brand sold locally. Investigators cross-referenced it with cleaning products collected from the Carter kitchen. The chemical profile matched perfectly. Someone had wiped that rifle with a cloth taken from their own sink. Graves sat in silence reading that report. It was almost too simple. Whoever fired that weapon hadn't needed sophistication, just familiarity. He imagined the motions: taking the key, opening the cabinet, retrieving the rifle, then cleaning it afterwards in the same house. There was an intimacy to the crime that chilled him. Behind the scenes, pressure from the district attorney grew heavier. Media coverage had reignited after a local station aired a special titled "The Silent Daughter." Talk shows debated whether Lily was a traumatized victim or a cunning manipulator. The small-town tragedy had become national curiosity. Graves avoided interviews completely, spending his nights in the office surrounded by stacks of photos, statements, and reports. The sound of the coffee maker had become the heartbeat of the investigation. One evening, he reviewed financial statements again. Something small caught his eye. On December 23rd, 2 days before the murder, Daniel Carter had withdrawn $5,000 in cash. No one knew why. The bills were never found in the house. It could have been stolen by the supposed intruder, but that theory was wearing thin. Graves wondered if Lily knew about it, or if that money had served another purpose altogether. By February 10th, the breakthrough arrived not from new evidence, but from reanalyzing old details. The blood spatter pattern on the headboard had initially been labeled as consistent with close-range shooting. But when the lab reran trajectory models, they discovered something unexpected. One shot's angle suggested the victim had been lying down while the shooter stood on the left side of the bed. That position aligned perfectly with the side closest to the doorway, where the carpet indentations from socked feet were discovered. The killer had entered, stood over the bed,
and fired 3 times in under 2 seconds. Execution, not panic. That night, Graves couldn't sleep. He stared at his ceiling, thinking of Daniel's last moments. The absence of defensive wounds wasn't mercy, it was calculation. He imagined the silence after the last shot, the faint ticking of the clock, the quiet sob that might have followed, or maybe no sound at all. The next morning, he signed the paperwork for a warrant to seize Lily Carter's laptop and personal journals. Officers collected them from her aunt's house, where she had been staying since the funeral. When the data extraction was complete, they found something that turned suspicion into certainty. A series of journal entries from early December described her growing resentment toward her father's new relationship. One line read, "He doesn't see me anymore. He talks to her more than me. He says he loves us both, but that's not true." The final entry, dated December 24th, ended with a chilling sentence. "Tomorrow, he'll finally understand how much I love him." Graves felt his hands go cold as he read it. That single line collapsed every doubt. The motive wasn't money, it was possession. The kind of distorted love that sees no boundary between affection and control. In a small-town department, cases like this leave scars. Some officers whispered disbelief, others grim acceptance. Graves kept silent. His job wasn't to feel, it was to prove. He worked with the district attorney's office to prepare the arrest warrant, ensuring every procedural thread was tied tight. The last thing he wanted was a technicality tearing this case apart later. February 14th, Valentine's Day. While the rest of Frost Hollow decorated store windows with hearts and roses, a convoy of 3 police cars rolled quietly toward the house where Lily now lived with her aunt. The arrest was uneventful. She didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't even ask why. She simply looked at Graves as they led her away, her expression unreadable. He'd seen that look before, in people who'd already accepted the ending long before it arrived. At headquarters, the booking process moved with mechanical precision. Mugshots, fingerprints, paperwork. The press caught wind within an hour. Cameras waited outside as the girl who had once been the symbol of tragedy became the focus of accusation. But even as the town's judgment hardened, Graves remained troubled by one thing: the missing money. It wasn't in any of Lily's accounts, nor in her belongings. He wondered if Daniel had intended that cash for Mary Ann, perhaps as a down payment for their new home. If so, it was one more dream buried with him. The pre-trial phase dragged on for months. Psychologists examined Lily, evaluating her mental state during the time of the murder. Reports described emotional detachment, unresolved grief, and latent resentment toward paternal control. The defense argued diminished capacity, claiming years of trauma and loneliness had fractured her perception. The prosecution called it motive, pure and simple. Through it all, Graves attended every session quietly, seated behind the prosecution bench. He rarely took notes anymore. The story was etched into him. Witnesses testified, forensic experts explained ballistic details, and digital analysts confirmed the deleted searches and journal entries. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day. Then came the footage. Weeks after the arrest, a neighbor discovered an old home security system in his garage, an outdated camera that faced part of Birchwood Lane. The night of December 24th, around 3 in the morning, it captured faint movement outside the Carter residence. The figure was blurred by snow, but distinctly small, wearing a light sweatshirt. The person walked from the backyard fence toward the front door and then disappeared inside. The timestamp aligned perfectly with the estimated time of death. When the footage was played in court, the defense objected to its clarity, but the implication was undeniable. By the trial's final week, even the most skeptical observers knew where this was heading. Lily Carter's face remained impassive as the prosecution described her final acts. standing over her father, firing 3 precise shots, then staging a break-in with a broken window and a discarded wallet. They described her long hours afterwards, sitting in silence before calling for help, waiting until the first light of Christmas morning turned blood to shadow. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. Guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment without parole. Graves felt no triumph, but an ache that reached bone deep. Justice in Frost Hollow had been served, but it carried no warmth. In the months that followed, the town tried to heal. The Carter house remained empty, unsold, a monument to silence. Marianne left Frost Hollow entirely, unable to pass Birchwood Lane without breaking down. Graves transferred out of homicide later that year, taking a desk job in Helena. Colleagues said he was tired. Maybe he was. Some cases end in closure, others linger, like the echo of gunfire across falling snow. And so when people in Frost Hollow speak of that Christmas, they don't mention gifts or church bells. They talk instead about the house at 1247 Birchwood Lane, the one where love turned to possession and silence replaced carols, the one where a father's devotion met a daughter's darkness, the one that taught an entire town that even the warmest homes can hide the coldest hearts.
Winter bled slowly out of Frost Hollow that year. The drifts receded, but the silence stayed. In the months after the trial, Birchwood Lane turned into a road people avoided unless they had to pass it. Mail piled on the porch of the Carter house. Flyers curled under the weight of thawing snow, and the Christmas lights still clung to the eaves like frozen veins. The town council tried to convince a realtor to list the property, but no one wanted to show it. The house had become a landmark of dread, the kind of place whispered about by teenagers driving past at night with their headlights dimmed. Detective Graves retired from homicide in April. He boxed his files carefully, labeling the Carter case in neat handwriting before handing it to archives. When he walked out of the precinct for the last time, the sun was just setting behind the Beartooth Mountains, staining the horizon the same pale red he had seen on the Carter bed sheets. He told himself it was coincidence, but he carried that color with him all the way home. The story did not fade quickly. Documentaries arrived, reporters tracing the tragedy's timeline, analysts debating motive versus madness. Producers called it The Frost Hollow Murder, the same title that would later appear in streaming thumbnails across the country. They filmed drone shots of empty streets, stitched together home videos of Lily as a child, smiling at her father during science fairs. They layered soft piano beneath archival news footage, packaging grief into content. For the residents of Frost Hollow, it was like reopening the wound again and again. Graves watched the first broadcast alone in his living room. He turned off the lights, let the glow of the television paint his face, and listened to his own name spoken by narrators he'd never met. They quoted his reports word for word, even the sentences he'd rewritten a dozen times to keep emotion out. When the closing credits rolled, he sat in silence, realizing that what had once been evidence was now entertainment. Lily Carter began serving her sentence at Mountain View Correctional in eastern Montana. Prison staff described her as quiet, polite, detached. She joined the library work program, shelving books no one read. Psychologists reported signs of introspection, though no overt remorse. When asked directly about the night of the murder, she said only one sentence: "He was leaving me." The warden later repeated those words to a journalist, and they became the headline that defined the next wave of coverage. Years passed, but Frost Hollow never really returned to what it had been. The high school science club that Daniel Carter once coached was renamed in his memory. His former students set up a scholarship in his name, funding it with small donations and bake sale proceeds. Each spring, they released paper lanterns into the night sky, one for every year since his death. The lanterns drifted above Birchwood Lane, casting a fragile glow over the house that still stood empty, waiting for a buyer brave enough to cross its threshold. Graves visited that street once more,
2 summers after the conviction. Weeds had grown through the cracks in the driveway, and the mailbox leaned forward like a bowed head. He stepped out of his car and stood at the curb, listening to the rustle of dry grass. The neighborhood was quiet, only the faint hum of cicadas filling the air. He imagined Daniel's voice somewhere inside the house, patient and tired, explaining a science lesson to a child who no longer wanted to listen. Then the image faded, replaced by the memory of police lights, the flash of cameras, and the metallic smell of blood mixed with pine from the Christmas tree. He turned away before the memories could root again. By the 5th anniversary, the murder had entered that peculiar phase of notoriety reserved for small-town tragedies, too old for breaking news, too recent for history. True crime podcasts revisited it annually, analyzing minute details, questioning motives, searching for alternative theories that could make the story feel new. One podcaster suggested an accomplice. Another argued that the psychological reports were flawed. Graves ignored them all. He knew the truth did not need embellishment. The real horror had never been the act itself, but the intimacy of it. The distance between the murderer and the murdered, measured not in feet, but in bloodline. Lily's aunt moved to Oregon soon after the trial, leaving behind only a for sale sign that rotted in the yard. The rest of the Carter family scattered quietly. At Daniel's old school, the chemistry lab still bore his handwriting on a whiteboard, formulas half erased but never replaced. Teachers left it there out of respect, a ghost written in marker. Inside prison, Lily grew older, her features sharpening into something distant from the girl on the news. She spent years reading psychology textbooks, sometimes annotating the margins with questions about grief, identity, and control. A counselor once asked her if she understood why people called her a monster. She replied that monsters at least believe they're something else. The counselor noted the answer as evasive but self-aware. It was the last formal interview she ever gave. Detective Graves kept a single photograph from the case. Daniel and Lily standing in front of a Christmas tree, both smiling, unaware of the future. He kept it not as evidence, but as a reminder of how fragile love could become when twisted by fear. He framed it beside his retirement certificate, the contrast almost cruel. In later years, the Carter house was finally sold to a young couple from out of state. They repainted the siding, tore out the carpet, and planted wildflowers in the front yard. For a time, the neighborhood dared to believe the curse had lifted, but local kids swore they could still see faint light flicker in the upstairs window late at night, like someone turning a bedroom lamp on and off. Adults dismissed it as imagination, yet few lingered near the property after dark. Every December, Frost Hollow still decorated Main Street with wreaths and fake snow. The community held a winter fair, and for a few days, laughter returned. But beneath the music and the colored lights, there remained a shared understanding, an unspoken rule about the fragility of peace. People locked their doors earlier, checked their windows twice. Some left porch lights burning through the night. The holiday no longer felt quite the same. Graves eventually moved south, seeking warmer weather and distance. But sometimes when the temperature dropped suddenly and the air smelled faintly of pine, he would think of that Christmas morning in 2024, the flashing lights, the white frost on the roof, and the girl wrapped in a shock blanket whispering about an intruder who never existed. He would wonder whether she ever replayed those hours in her mind, or whether denial had frozen over her memory the way winter freezes a lake. In the end, the Frost Hollow case became less about crime and more about the limits of understanding. The townspeople learned that evil rarely arrives with warning signs. It grows quietly, nourished by isolation, until one night it decides to speak in the language of violence. For Daniel Carter, that language ended 3 times, in the space of 2 seconds. For Lily, it will echo for the rest of her life. When Graves died a decade later, the photograph on his desk was still there. A visiting officer from Billings noticed it, recognized the faces, and wondered why a man would keep such a painful memory so close. Maybe it wasn't pain he saw, but a kind of absolution. the need to remember what justice costs when it finally arrives. Back in Frost Hollow, new families moved in, unaware of the history beneath their feet. Children rode bicycles down Birchwood Lane, their laughter scattering the ghosts for another generation. But every winter, when snow began to fall thick and silent, the town seemed to hold its breath. Because somewhere under that blanket of white lay the memory of one Christmas when love turned lethal, and a father's devotion met the cold certainty of his daughter's hand. And in that quiet, the story of Frost Hollow never truly ended. It merely slept, waiting for the next snowfall to whisper it awake once more.